Good morning, everyone. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining me today. And special thanks to Sandra Rabin and Ken Topola for inviting me and organizing this event. When I told my friends 15 years ago that I'm going to work in Suriname, the most common response was, Suri who? One of my friends said to me, Jacob, I'm afraid they're sending you to work in a place that doesn't exist. So let me start with some basic information about Suriname. Suriname is one of the smallest and least populated countries in South America. It is bounded by French-speaking French Guyana in the east, English-speaking Guyana in the west, and Portuguese-speaking Brazil in the south. And this is a continent that predominantly is Spanish-speaking. So this is a corner with 4 different languages other than Spanish. The population of Suriname is about 620,000 people. The capital city is Paramaribo, and Suriname is the most ethnically diverse country in South America and the Caribbean. The main ethnic groups are Hindustanis. They are originally from northern India. They came in the late part of the 19th century to work in the plantations when slavery was abolished. The Maroons are descendants of escaped African slaves. Creoles are mixed of European and African ancestry. Javanese are people from the island of Java in Indonesia. And they also came to work in the plantations after slavery was abolished. And then we have mixed race, American Indians, Chinese, and white. The main religions are almost evenly distributed between Protestant, Hindu, Catholic, and Muslim. The Muslim population are mainly from those who came from Java in Indonesia, and some of them from the people who came from India. The official language is Dutch, and the spoken language is called Sranan Tongo, which is a mixture of Dutch, Portuguese, African languages, English, Yiddish, and Hebrew. So I'll give you a couple of examples. Bad food is treif. Problems are tsuras. And there are many words in Hebrew like tsali, sika, pina, masa, etc. Paramaribo, the capital, is also known as the Wooden City. It was placed on the UNESCO World Heritage List in 2002, and there are a couple of hundred magnificent wooden colonial structures in the city center. One of them is the St. Peter and Paul Cathedral. Interesting, it was built in 1809 as the Jewish theater, but it was bought in 1826 by the Catholic Church and constructed as cathedral in 1885. The cathedral is the biggest wooden structure in the Western Hemisphere, and it is absolutely magnificent. Another beautiful wooden building is our synagogue, Neve Shalom. And later on, we'll see how it looks like inside. Over 90% of the country is covered by dense rainforest jungles and rivers. There are no roads into the interior, and the only way to get there is either by small airplane or by dugout canoes in the river system of the country. The country is also very diverse with its wildlife, with many rare species living in the wild. You can see in the top right is it's called Okipuki, and that's a frog that lives only in a very small, narrow place in the world, in the border between Brazil and Suriname. There's the biggest population of jaguars roaming in the world in the jungles of Suriname. Then the top and the bottom right bird, it's called cock of the rock, and that's a beautiful little bird that's typical for these jungles. When I was in 2009 in Australia, I read an article in the Australian newspaper about Suriname, and they call the country the last Eden. So now that we know that Suriname does exist, the presentation will be divided to 4 parts. The first part will be the history of the Jewish community in Suriname. The second part is Suriname during World War II. The third part will be Suriname after World War II. And the last one is the situation of the Suriname Jewish community today. So In 531 years ago, in 1492, following the Alhambra decree, the Spanish Inquisition ordered the expulsion of the Jews who will not convert. So about 100,000 Jews, Spanish Jews, were expelled. They moved to Portugal, Italy, Greece, the Balkans, Turkey, and North Africa. About 200,000 Jews who stayed in Spain, they converted, and they're known as conversos, moranos, or anusim in Hebrew. Now, 4 years later, the Portuguese introduced their own version of Inquisition, but expulsion wasn't an option for the Portuguese Jews. It was either convert or die. 90 years later, in 1581, the 4 northern provinces of Holland that used to be under Spanish rule, they gained their independence. And one of the things that they did in order to poke the Spanish in their eyes was to declare freedom of religion, which at that time was a revolutionary concept in Europe. As a result, in 1600, thousands of Portuguese and Spanish Jews moved to Amsterdam and established the Dutch Jewish community. Now, they enjoyed freedom of religion in Holland, but they're not allowed to own land. And Europe at that time was an agrarian society. So no land meant exclusion from wealth. But new opportunities in the New World attracted thousands of Portuguese Jews to the Dutch colonies, where they allowed to own land. So in 1593, how do you go back to them? Okay. In 1593, Suriname was discovered by the Spanish, but never settled. In 1639, the first group of Portuguese Jews arrived via Dutch Brazil, now known as a town in the north known Recife. They settled in the place they called Torarica. Now, later on, they cleared the jungle and started sugar plantations. And later on, Torarica became the first capital of Suriname. Now, it's very interesting because in Spanish and Portuguese, Torarica means Torah Rica, or our rich Torah. And this is the first or last capital city in the world that I heard of that called after our rich or splendid Torah. Now, 12 years later, in 1651, after 2 failed attempts by the British to colonize the colony of Suriname, Sir Francis Willoughby established or founded a permanent British colony. Now, the British settlers came mainly from Barbados, and they lived together with the Jews in Torarica. A year later, a second group of Portuguese Jews settled nearby in a place called Cassipora Creek. And in 1665, a third group led by a gentleman called David Nassi arrived from Holland, and they also joined the group in Cassipora Creek. And in 1667, they built a wooden synagogue there. Now, even though the Jews were not allowed to live in England at that time, it was a British policy to encourage as many settlers as possible in the colonies. So in 1665, a Dutch-British war started in European water. And 5 months after the outbreak of the war, the British granted special privileges to the Jews. Why? So they will not leave. The Jews were the backbone of the economy. They had the knowledge on how to successfully run plantations, sugar plantations mainly, and they had excellent relationship with the American Indians. And the first 2 attempts that failed by the British is because the American Indian didn't like them. They didn't get along, they kicked them out. So now when they live with the Jews in Torarica and the Jews have excellent relationship with the American Indians, it was a win-win for the British. Now, the special privileges that they offered were freedom of religion that the Jews in Europe didn't have, freedom to have their own Jewish school. They didn't have to go to the Dutch school in the system, freedom to own land, which they didn't have in most of Europe, freedom to have their own court of justice. And that meant that the Jews now have self-rule. They're living according to the Jewish laws, not according to the Dutch laws. And the last thing was the right to have a private civil guard or army. With these rights, the Jews of Suriname were the only diaspora community to achieve complete political autonomy before the founding of the State of Israel. Now, in 1667, a peace agreement between the Dutch and the the British was signed, and it's known as the Second Breda Treaty. And in Article 3 of this agreement, there was kind of a swap of land. Suriname was given to the Dutch, and New Amsterdam was given swapped to the British. Now, New Amsterdam, as you know today, is New York City. So in retrospect, it seems like the worst real estate transaction ever. But for the Dutch, it was the deal of the century at that time. Why? Because of the importance of sugar. Now, sugar was the most valuable commodity at that time, better than gold. There were 100 ships sailing between Suriname and the Netherlands at that time carrying sugarcane. And they were processed with thousands of small factories that employed tens of thousands of people in Holland. And then the Dutch traders sold the sugar all over Europe. And anyone, almost anyone that were involved in the supply chain of sugar at that time became rich. So after 15 years of British rule, the colony changed hands. Now in 1667, the Dutch feared that the Jews will live with the British. So they kept the old special privileges. And in addition, in 1669, the Dutch granted the Jews the right to establish a Jewish colony known as the Joden Savannah in Dutch, or the Jewish Savannah. Now, with these special privileges, the Jews felt that here, look at the picture, in the middle of the jungle, they found their own promised land. They called it Jerusalem on the riverside. And here in the middle of the jungle, in the Amazon jungle, they started building their own Jerusalem. If you come today to the Joden Savannah, you'll see this sign. It says, "Welcome to the Joden Savannah, the former residence of the Portuguese Jewish nation in Suriname, also known as Jerusalem on the riverside." Now, the Jews thrived in the Jewish Savannah. If in Tararica they lived with the British, here it was the only place in the world at that time where Jews lived and governed their own town. They built a synagogue, a brick synagogue, and they call it Bracha v'Shalom, or blessing and peace. The town became, the Joden Savannah became the center of Jewish life. They have the synagogue there, the court of justice, the school, and the communal authorities. Their numbers start to grow very fast. If in 1694, they had only 575 Jews that owned 40 plantations, 43 years later, there were about already 1,500 to 2,000 Jews. Of them, 800 owned 115 plantations out of the 400 in the country. Now, just one thing, according to the special privileges, the plantations could be owned only by Sephardic Jews. Because they're Orthodox Jews, they call the plantations in biblical names, such as Carmel, Beit El, Hebron, Beersheba, Machanaim, Sukkot, Gilgal, Goshen. If you look at the map, you think you're in the promised land if you look at the names of the plantations. On Shabbat and holidays, the Jews from the plantations used to come to town to celebrate the Shabbat, the holidays, and to socialize. Now, the historian Robert Cohen wrote in his book, Jews in Another Environment, that the most important Jewish center in the Western Hemisphere during the 18th century was the great colony Suriname. There, Jews formed perhaps the most privileged Jewish community in the world. But not like the Dutch settlers who came to make money and go back to Holland. The Jews came to stay. There was nothing to go back for them to Holland. For 100 years, the Jewish Savannah was a flourishing community. Now, the success attracted hundreds of Ashkenazi Jews to Suriname, but they were not allowed to own land. So they became petty traders in the new capital, Paramaribo. But nothing is forever. Between 1765 and 1795, social, political, and financial changes caused the collapse of the Suriname sugar plantations-based economy. It was the perfect storm. From 115 plantations in 1737, 50 years later, there were only 46 Jewish plantations left, mainly lumber and coffee, no more sugar plantations. From being very rich, in no time, 2/3 of the community was pulled down to poverty. So the Jews started to move to the new capital, Paramaribo, and the Jewish Savannah continued to be the rabbinical and spiritual center, but only 22 families, about 100 people stayed there, and they were mostly elderly and impoverished. Now, the Jews used to come to celebrate the high holidays in the Jewish savannah until September 1832, when a big fire reduced the buildings to ashes. And within a few years, the jungle took over and the place disappeared. In the new capital, Paramaribo, the Jews moved there from the Jordan Savannah and the closed plantations, and in 1825, in April, the Dutch crown terminated all the special privileges. Now the Jews lost everything. The Jews now worked in trade and as professionals, but the population started to decline and decline fast. If in the peak in 1737, we said there were maximum 2,000 Jewish people living in Suriname, in 1937, there were only 790 Jews left. And in 1975, when Suriname gained its independence from the Netherlands, there were only 500 people left. And the numbers continue to decline. Now, many of the Jews that arrived from the late 17th century, they settled, as I said, in the capital Paramaribo. The Ashkenazi Jews, they spoke among themselves Dutch and Yiddish. But the Portuguese Jews, the Sephardic Jews, continued to speak Portuguese until 1837. Between 1690 and 1760s, the two communities prayed together in the Neve Shalom synagogue. But this is the Neve Shalom synagogue. But in 1716, the Sephardic Jews, who saw themselves superior to the Ashkenazi because they enjoy all the special privileges and they were the wealthy one, they decided to split the community and to build their own synagogue. So in 1734, the division between the two communities were formalized, and the Sephardic have their own synagogue now. It's called Tzedek V'Shalom, Justice and Peace. What interesting was that after the split, the Ashkenazi community continued to pray according to the Sephardic rite, and it continues until today. Only after the collapse of the sugar plantations in 1789, the two communities started to work together again. Okay, let's see Suriname in World War II. Suriname was the world's major supplier of bauxite. Bauxite, for those who don't know, is the raw material for aluminum. After the outbreak of World War II on September 1st, 1939, the United States could not afford to lose the major supplier of bauxite, because without aluminum, aircraft and shipbuilding production could have been stopped. The first alarming sign of things to happen happened on May 10th, 1940, which is exactly the same day that neutral Holland fell to German forces. A German cargo ship called the Goslar was sank by its captain in the middle of the Suriname River in an attempt to block the flow of bauxite out of Suriname. And you can see at the top picture, this is the Goslar, a few minutes picture before the captain sank it. The second picture in the middle is a few minutes after the ship was sank, in the middle of, as you see, in the middle of the Suriname River. And the third picture at the bottom, it's a picture that I took last time I was in Suriname, just before COVID, and it's still there. It's still there. It's like a monument for reminding World War II. Now, Suriname was very strategic at that time, and the importance was obvious. But in the east, French Guyana was controlled at that time by pro-German Vichy government. They could cross the Maravane River, which is the border between the two countries, and within less than an hour, they could occupy and destroy the unprotected mines in eastern Suriname. In addition, thousands of German immigrants, sympathetic to the Nazis, were at that time in Brazil and other neighboring countries. So the threat was real. As a result, President Roosevelt on September 1st, 1941, offered Queen Wilhelmina, which was the exiled Queen of Holland, to station 3,000 infantry and anti-aircraft troops to defend Suriname. That was 3 months before the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor. Now, lack of basic infrastructure in Suriname required the Americans to invest very heavily in building, among others, military air base, roads, and military barracks. So tiny Suriname, at that time, less than 200,000 people, enjoyed an economic boom that lasted the whole war period. The famous Surinamese historian and writer, Sylvia McLeod, told me a few years ago that if you ask any Surinamese at that time or after the war, what do you think about World War II? The answer most probably would have been, those were our best days ever. Now, I just want to go a little bit back in history out of Suriname and explain to you some historical event that happened at the same time. Between 1934 and 1941, Nazi Germany pursued an aggressive policy of forced emigration for the Reich Jews. It's known as Judenrein, or clean of Jews. In 1935, they enacted, the Nazis, Nuremberg laws, which basically, among others, stripped the 900,000 German Jews and later on the 200,000 Austrian Jews from their citizenship, and they became stateless in their own countries. Now, in order to immigrate or to emigrate to the United States, Canada, or Australia, they needed a visa, which was almost impossible to obtain. President Chaim Weizmann, who was the first president of Israel in 1948, he said at that time that the world seemed to be divided into two parts. Those places where the Jews could not live, and those places where the Jews could not enter. So with hundreds of thousands of German and Austrian Jews desperately trying to get visas somewhere else, there were thousands of people queuing in front of every American embassy and consulate, wherever they could find it. President Roosevelt decided to make a conference. It's called the Evian Conference. It's a town in France in July 1938 to discuss the refugee problem. He wanted to distribute the thousands or tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of Jews that are trying to escape between other countries. So he invited 32 nations to attend the conference. The conference was ultimately doomed. From the 32 countries that participated, they failed to come to any agreement on accepting Jewish refugees. Only one country agreed to accept 100,000 Jews, and that was a small and impoverished Caribbean island called the Dominican Republic. They had only 1.6 million people, and they wanted to accept 100,000, but President Roosevelt undermined the plan because he feared that the Dominican Republic is too close to the United States and many refugees will end up in America. So from the 100,000 visas that were available for German Jews and Austrian Jews to come, only 1,000 Jews managed to arrive before the gates were closed. But there were three other Caribbean colonies at that time that accepted between 600 to 2,000 refugees. This is the first settlers in German Jews that settled in the Dominican Republic in two places, Salsa and in the capital, namely, that's where they stayed. The three countries were Jamaica, Trinidad, and Suriname. Now, Jamaica, they accepted about a little bit more than 2,000 Jews in a place called Camp Gibraltar. It was built as a camp for the population of Gibraltar, which was a British protectorate at that time, or it's part of the overseas colonies of Britain. But they didn't move. They built it for 7,500 people, but they didn't move. So the camps were empty, and the Jewish distribution, joint distribution, and the Polish exiling government in exile convinced the British to take over 2,000 and keep them in this camp. Now, they're not allowed to leave the camp, they're not allowed to ask citizenship, and they're not allowed to work, but at least they were alive. And there were about 600 Jews who managed mainly from Germany to arrive to Trinidad because they exploited an immigration law loophole. And that was blocked after 600 of them arrived. It was blocked by the British Governor General. He changed the laws of refugees and they couldn't come. But those who arrived, they're known as the Calypso Jews, They lived there, they could live wherever they want, they established a synagogue, businesses, and they did a good life until the 1960s when they started emigrating out of training. But Suriname was the country that allowed anyone, no restriction on to come. And I just want to give you a couple of examples. The Jews who came to Suriname, the first group of them was the entire Sephardic Jewish community of Hamburg, Germany. And the last group, that was in 1938. And the last group was in Christmas Eve, 1942, where almost 200 Jews came on the board of the Portuguese boat Naesa from Lisbon, Portugal. And after that, the gates were closed in Europe. There was no way for Jews to come anymore. But in between, whoever came to Suriname, they were immediately housed in this villa, as you can see, and taken care of. There was a food given them by the American Jewish Distribution Committee. And as they were waiting in this building, the government of Suriname built them small houses in downtown Paramaribo, especially for them, so they can move and get their own life back. And because of the booming economy of Suriname, they immediately could get jobs. So they didn't suffer. They just, through this building, it was, staying there for a while, getting the house built and moving out, and they had jolly good life through the whole war. Suriname after the war. This is a story that very few people heard about. Now, at the end of the war, there were about between 7 to 11 million people, displaced persons or DPs, in camps scattered in Germany, Austria, and Italy. Among them, there were 250,000 Jews, Holocaust survivors. Now, because of the restrictions of the British on immigration to then Palestine and slow acceptance of Jews by Western countries, for example, only 3 years after the end of the war, 80,000 Jews were allowed to come to the United States as immigrants from DP camps. But in Canada, as you all know, in 1945, discussing how many Jews should allow to come to Canada, to enter Canada after the war, an anonymous Canadian government bureaucrat offered the now infamous reply, none is too many. So while the Jewish refugees were sitting in DP camps for years, waiting for any settlement, the Freeland League, which was an anti-Zionist organization, came with a plan known as the Saramaka Plan, settling 30,000 Jewish refugees in the district of Saramaka. Now, most people never heard about Saramaka. Saramaka is a district in Suriname. In 1946, there are only a couple of thousand people living in Saramaka. The district was isolated. There were no roads in the jungle, and there was no bridge over the Saramaka River, which connected to Paramaribo, to the capital, which is only 50 kilometers away. Even today, there are less than 18,000 people living in Saramaka. But at that time, it was a very busy place, mainly poisonous frogs, jaguars, and snakes. That was the welcoming committee to those who came to Saramaka. Now, in 1946, the League met with high official Dutch officials to discuss the idea of resettling 30,000 Jewish refugees in Saramaka. Now, the League, in February 1947, was informed that the local Surinamese parliament had no objection for the proposed Jewish settlement. And you have to remember, as we talked before, the Jews were the founders of the country, and they're very well respected by the locals. In April 1947, a delegation was sent to Saramaka to study the land and to develop a plan for the settlement. The League also secured, at that time, $35 million, which is equivalent for today, $475 million. It was donated by American donors, and it was to fund the settlement. That meant that there would be no cost to the host country, Suriname. Soon after, the Surinamese government signed an agreement providing the 30,000 Jewish settlers the right of autonomy, where Yiddish would be the language of education. That was the Freeland League vision, like Eastern European, like Jewish life in the jungles of the Amazon basin. As the news broke, thousands of Jews in a DP camp in Vienna, Austria, announced their eagerness to move to Saramaka. The League worked tirelessly to starting to implement the plan, but on May 14, 1948, the State of Israel was established. And now, after severe pressure from the Dutch government, who was very unsympathetic to the Jews, they have great reputation of like Jew lovers, but they were not. They bent the hand, basically, they forced the Surinamese parliament to cave in and to tell the Jews that now they have their own land that they can go to Israel. A few years ago, I was sitting in the farm of Shuldong. He's the president of the Jewish community in Suriname, a good friend of mine. And we were talking about the Saramaka plan. And he said to me, Jacob, if Saramaka plan was implemented, and even if over the years, 90% of those who came, the refugees, would have moved to other countries, we still could have been today a community of thousands of members. But unfortunately, it didn't happen. So let me finish the presentation with talking about the status of the Suriname Jewish community today. In 1999, after the members were declined dramatically, the two communities, the two congregations decided to merge, and the community changed from Orthodox to liberal, so everyone can feel comfortable and welcome. Now, the community is isolated. I mentioned it before, but it's isolated on two levels. First, geographically. There are very few flights, even today, coming to Suriname. And second of all, linguistically. As I said, South America is predominantly Spanish-speaking, and we are the only Dutch-speaking country, so it's very difficult to keep in touch with the other Jewish communities in Latin America. So, the two communities decided that the Neve Shalom synagogue would be the synagogue, the active synagogue, and that's how it's looked like inside. If you can see, the synagogue has sandy floor, and this is one of the last 4 Portuguese synagogues in the world that still have sandy floor. The other 3 are in Jamaica, Curacao, and St. Thomas. The old Sephardic synagogue, Tzedek V'Shalom, was closed down and its content were moved in 2010, to the replica that was built in the Israel Museum in Jerusalem. So if you visit the Israel Museum, you can see all the contents of the old Tzedek V'Shalom synagogue in display in Jerusalem. Now, what are the challenges of such a community today? The most obvious one is demographics. Small size. The community today has about 80 members, between 80 to 100 members. They're aging. We lost 18 members in the last 2 years. The second big issue in the demographic issue is the immigration. If in the past there were flow of Jews between Holland and Suriname and Holland, today the flow is only one way, out of Suriname. We lost 24 young members in the last few years. Now, some of them went to study overseas and never came back. Others got excellent jobs because of the skills in other countries, so they moved overseas. And others just moved to Israel. They made Aliyah. And as a result, there are very few opportunities for the youngsters in the community nowadays to find Jewish partners. And that leads to assimilation. The second big challenge is religious leadership. The community is without a rabbi for more than 60 years. They just cannot afford a full-time rabbi. And the third challenge is finance. It's obvious. The community has 2 synagogues, 3 cemeteries in Paramaribo, and many other assets that are very old buildings and very expensive to maintain. Also, the country is very poor. Over 70% of the population live below poverty line. To give you an example, the average salary in Suriname is about $350 to $400 a month. The country is in economic crisis. The annual inflation in the last few years is over 50%. Last year, it was 70%. And as a result, there are restrictions on the use of foreign exchange. So if in Canada, for example, or the US, if you need to buy anything Jewish, challah, matzot, kosher wine, candles for Shabbat, whatever, just go to the next supermarket in your neighborhood and buy whatever you need. But in Suriname, everything Jewish has to be imported. And what do you do when you have no access to foreign exchange? For example, Passover. We import the matzot and kosher wine from Miami. So how do you pay for that? So what did the community do to address those issues? On the demographics, there were 22 people who started attending conversion classes. They ran by Rabbi Mendelton Brink from Amsterdam. He used to come before COVID-19 every month for 10 days to run classes. It was amazing. But then came COVID-19 and destroyed everything. The country was in lockdown for 2 years. Internet is very bad in Suriname, and many people couldn't afford it, so they couldn't have classes in Zoom, and the things fell apart. Now, you may ask yourself, who are those 22 people who want to become Jews in Suriname? So there are 3 groups. One are married to Jewish partners. The second group is people that their ancestors were Jewish. They say in Suriname that if you shake your family tree, few Jews will fall. So those are, I call them fallen Jews from local family trees. And the last one, they're just people who want to become Jews. They come to services for years and participating in everything. And now they had the opportunity to become officially Jews, but it didn't happen, unfortunately. The community was so excited because they could, re-energize the community, but things went in a different direction. On the religious leadership, we have a local solution. For the high holidays, we have 2 good friends from New York City and the Surinamese guys who live in Aruba, and they're all Torah readers. So they used to come every year, the 3 of them, to help to the local Torah readers to run the high holidays, because we are now liberal, but they still go with the old traditions of Orthodox. Many traditions, you cannot kill overnight, switch off. So the women are sitting on, we close the Ezrat Nashim, so everybody will sit together, but the women sit on one side, the men sitting on the other side. I mean, nobody forced them, that's just tradition. So it's very challenging, but we do a wonderful, wonderful long services in the high holidays. And in the last 15 years, I managed to attract 3 rabbis to come for short term to help the community. Rabbi Chaim Beliak from California, Rabbi Shimon Moch, who was in the St. Thomas, and the Rabbi Elliot Baskin from Colorado, who came for the last high holidays with his wife, Dr. Hillary Baskin, and it was amazing. They had such a good time, and they asked to come back for Passover, which is great. But again, it is only for a short term, but their visits of these rabbis are so important to the community because they are inspiring and everybody comes for the services. Nobody finds reason to avoid, On the financial side, and that's the last part I want to talk about, the challenges, in my opinion, and I'm a finance person, the community doing an amazing, an extraordinary job with maximizing the revenues from the existing assets. Now, they cover almost all the operating expenses of the community, which is absolutely amazing, in my opinion. But what do you do with special projects? And how do you pay, as I said, for the imported products? So for that, we have the high membership, and I go about this a little bit later. But let me share with you a couple of quick pictures to see how Jewish life in Suriname is today. So in the top right, this is Kabbalat Shabbat. Every Friday night after the service, we join together in our small community center near the synagogue, and we do the blessings, and then we have a community dinner every Shabbat, every Friday night. On the top left, it's a Purim spiel. At the bottom right is our community Passover Seder. Every year we have a community Seder, and on the left side, it's Hanukkah. And this is a picture that I took in my last visit just before the COVID closed the gates. This was a Rosh Hashanah service. This is Simchat Torah. So, what is the Chai membership? 15 years ago now, because we're in 2023, after 2 weeks working in Suriname, I didn't know that I will come back to Suriname for almost 3 years working there. I thought that they were the first 2 weeks with the last one. So I was so touched by the warmth and the friendship of the community. And I understood their challenges and I decided to do something, but I've never been involved in Chesed committee or any NGOs and stuff like that. I didn't know what to do. So I decided on my flight back to start something. It was just before the high holidays. And I said, all my friends will start complaining about how expensive is membership in the synagogues. And I said, okay, I have a good idea, plan B. I'll show them some pictures of the beautiful synagogue. And I said, you know what? You can come a high member for $18 a year, and $180 will give you a lifetime membership in this beautiful synagogue. You have all the privileges. You can come to services, you can have bar mitzvah and bat mitzvah to your kids, you can get married, whatever. The only problem is you want to come for Shabbat service, it will cost you about $1,500 to fly there. But I said to them, it's a joke, and it's basically a one-time donation. It's not an ongoing membership, And the objective was, I explained to them, is to support special projects that will help the community to live meaningful Jewish life and to thrive. So over the years, we have almost 150 now, members worldwide, which is amazing. We publish every twice a year, high newsletter with lots of beautiful picture to keep the members involved, to know how things going in Suriname, because you never read about Suriname anywhere. So this is the only source of information. So let me share with you some of the projects that we did in the last few years. Quickly, I'll go through them, but I think it can show you how small amount of money can change life dramatically to a small and isolated Jewish community. So let me start with Passover. Every year, I pay for the matzot to the store in Miami, and the matzot and the kosher wine. But the community pay, this is in US dollars, and the community pay for the shipping, either by ship or by plane during COVID because of the problems in ship deliveries, so we flew it. But they paid in Surinamese dollars to a local shipping company. The shipping costs 2/3 of the price. So they're very proud and they're insisting they don't want handouts, but they don't have access to foreign exchange, so we made it a win-win. The high membership pay for the products and they pay for the shipping. And now every year we continue to have the Seder, and every family receive matzot and kosher wine, every family, for the whole holiday. Now, one of the most important personally, the things that I did in my life, in 2015, I met with the community leadership. It was 70 years after the end of World War II. The president of the community, Shul Dong, said to me at that time, Jacob, in the last 50 years, we were trying to build a memorial monument for the Surinamese Jews who died in the Holocaust, but it was too expensive and we couldn't afford it. So I said to him, Shul, you are in South America, the Holocaust was in Europe. Can you explain? And he said to me, yeah. In 1940, Suriname was a tiny country, less than 200,000 people. So if you wanted to study in university, there was no university in Suriname, you had to go to Holland. If you were a professional, such as a doctor, and you wanted to specialize, you had to go to Holland. A business person, most of your contacts were family or friends in Holland. And many of the members used to go to visit families that they had in Holland. Back and forth. Those people were in the wrong place at the wrong time. He said to me that over the years, the community managed to identify about 85 members who died in the Holocaust. But he said to me, Jacob, there are many more. We just don't know who they are because they died with the entire family. He added to me, Jacob, this is our last chance. Would you help us? Now, how could I say no? But I didn't know what I'm getting into. We met with the most famous architect in Suriname. He's not Jewish, but he's a very dear friend of the community. And a week later, he said to us, let me think about it. And a week later, he came with a proposal. And he also offered us also to do it as a turnkey solution. He said to us, listen, it's so complex. We have to import the granite from China. We have to engrave it. We have to build it. You don't know anyone in the industry. You don't know even where to start to look for. And he said, I know all the players in the industry, and I know who is good one and who is bad ones. And I'll convince everyone to do it at cost. So it will be, affordable. And the affordable was $15,000 US. So now we had two challenges. The first is obviously on the funding. Where do I get $15,000, It's I didn't know that I'm going to this such a big hall. And the second one is, how do you come with a complete and accurate list of the victims of the Holocaust 70 years after the war was ended? So on the funding side, miracles happen. 3 weeks after we started the first meeting, 3 complete strangers that never heard about Suriname, Suri who? They're one of those people who used to ask Suri who? They donated $10,000. And the rest of the money was raised through the Chai members. So in 6 weeks, we were fully funded. What they couldn't do in 70 years, we did in 6 weeks. Amazing. And then we had the second challenge. How do we identify the names of the victims? So we contacted Yad Vashem in Jerusalem and the Washington, D.C. Holocaust Museum in D.C., and they didn't respond. A week passed by, week after week, no answer. We called, nobody answered. And we started to feel the pressure. But again, miracles happen from all places. I was working at that time in West Africa, in a country called the Ivory Coast. And when I was in Abidjan, the capital, I met, from all places, I met the right person. He was a young historian from Yad Vashem. And I told him the story, and he said to me, Jacob, in 2 weeks, I'm going back to Jerusalem, and I'll connect you with the right people in Yad Vashem. And 2 weeks later, I received an email from Dr. Alex Avram. Dr. Alex Avram is the director of the Wall of Names, which is the central database of all the names of the Holocaust victims in Yad Vashem. He is the world authority for the victim names in the world. In short, we started to compare notes, and Yad Vashem had about 20 names that we didn't have in our list, and we had more than 25 names that they didn't have. So we went back and forth for a couple of iterations, and then we decided that we have 104 names, and those are the complete and accurate list as possible, you know? So the names were passed to the architect to be engraved, and we started planning the ceremony. In March 2016, the unveiling of the memorial monument for the 104 Surinamese Jews who died in the Holocaust took place on the grounds of the Neve Shalom synagogue in Paramaribo. The ceremony was attended by all the ambassadors of the countries who fought in World War II, all the religious leaders in Suriname, government officials, war veterans, and Holocaust survivors. It was a very touching ceremony indeed. I want to show you, look at the picture of the monument, and I want to explain the background. This is a picture of the 650 tombstone in the Jewish Savannah and Kasipora Creek, in the cemeteries in the jungle. They're back to 1666, which is 357 years ago. Now, the Jews were very rich at that time in the Odin Savannah, so they have beautiful, beautiful tombstones, each of them engraved in different languages and symbols. And the symbols could tell exactly who the person was. Amazing. For example, the one on the left is a Kohen. The one on the right is a Levi, and so forth and so on. But one of the most common symbols in these cemeteries is a symbol of a tree being fallen by either the angel of death or the hand of God. This symbol refers to life that ended before its time or early death. Our architect decided to use the same symbol that their ancestors used for hundreds of years in our monument, because he said all those victims died before their time. So at the top of the monument, you can see fallen trees. And this is based on the same motif. The other 3 sides of the monument, it's just very simple. We have the name, the family name, date of birth, date of death, and the camp that they were murdered. And the camps are exactly mirror of the Dutch Jews. 53% in Auschwitz, 20% in Sobibor, and the rest in Bergen-Belsen, Dachau, Theresienstadt, and some other places. So, 75 years after the end of World War II, the 104 Surinamese Jews now that murdered in the Holocaust are all remembered. Previously, many were forgotten, and some of them were erased from history altogether. Now, every year, as you can see here, this is from a couple of weeks ago from the International Holocaust Memorial Day. And in Yom HaShoah, the community gathers in front of the monument for memorial ceremony. We read the names, we say the prayers, and we lay flowers for their memory. And I can show you another picture that, for me, it's very touching. The four gentlemen on the right are the last four Surinamese veteran soldiers who fought in World War II. Some of them who fought in Europe, some of them fought in the Pacific. They're all in the mid-90s, but they insist to come every memorial monument, every memorial, to be participating there. They're sweet, sweet gentlemen. We wanted to put their names in a Karen Kayemet, in a forest on their name, and they refused. They say we didn't do it for honors. And so they come, thank God they can still walk, and it's very touching. Before I finish, I want to go through a couple of very quickly about some projects, as I said again, to show how very little money can change life in such a country. This is the mikvah. The mikvah is more than 200 years old. You can't find this kind of a mikvah anymore anywhere in the world. And for more than 20 years, until I came, the mikvah wasn't operational because the pipes burst and they didn't have the money to fix it. And with the money from the high membership, the $18 here and there, excuse me, we fixed the pipes, and the mikvah is operational and used every high holidays, and whoever wants to use it can always use it. It's beautiful, just gorgeous, very unique. As Cantor said before, we arranged a birthright trip to 16 youngsters from the community. And that was a trip that was only targeted the Surinamese Jews. They didn't mix them with the Dutch or anybody else. And the day they came to visit in Jerusalem, they came to the Israel Museum. And in complete coincidence, that day, they opened the gates for the replica of the Tzedek V'Shalom synagogue, where most of their parents had the bar mitzvah, bat mitzvah, the grandparents got married there, and so forth and so on. It was so touching for them, and it's amazing. This is a picture of the three cemeteries that we have in Paramaribo. There's the old Ashkenazi cemetery that is full, and one Ashkenazi, one Sephardic still existing. There are more than 2,000 graves in this place. Now, we didn't have fence. It was too expensive to build fence. So the place became the garbage dump of the city of Paramaribo. And the jungle took over. And it was completely disgraced. And the community said, Jacob, how can we do something? And the only thing to do is to fence it. So we went to a wonderful gentleman who said to us, he's the biggest dealer of building material in Paramaribo. And he said, I'll give it to you at cost, and you pay when you can. And we raised the money. The city of Paramaribo helped us with, as you see, people to clear the jungle and tractors. And from every cemetery, we had more than 50 trucks full of junk building materials. You can only think about anything, it was there. And we cleaned it. And then we built a beautiful metal fence around the cemetery. It's hundreds and hundreds of meters, and on four sides of every cemetery. In Canada, it would have cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. In Suriname, it was a couple of tens of thousands. But with the planning that we don't have to pay up front or anything, we managed to fence everything. We clean it every 2 weeks. We cut the grass. Every year, we clean with high pressure the tombstones. You can see a tombstone, for example, I took a picture from 1716. Look how it looks like. You can read anything and everything. And it is the most beautiful and well-maintained cemeteries in Paramaribo. There are so many ethnic groups and so many cemeteries. And I just want to show you a contrast. This is an historic cemetery of Suriname. It's called the Oranje Town, which is in Dutch means the orange garden. Look at the garden. This took only a couple of weeks ago. Disgrace. And compare a national cemetery to our cemetery, it's amazing. And before I leave, this is the last thing I want to show you. We decided to make a project which called every grave will have a name. A couple of years ago, just before COVID, I came with two friends as a request from the community, one from the States and one from Denmark. And we, with Lily, the vice president of community, and some friends, local ones, we surveyed all the 3 cemeteries. And we found out from the 2000 graves, 600 cannot be read. The reason is those who had a stone after hundreds of years of harsh weather of the tropic, the Amazon area, they are eroded and it hardly cannot be read. Others were vandalized. People stole the beautiful marbles to put, stones in the backyard so they can have free stones. And the poor people in the community over the years, they couldn't afford to add a stone, so they put a wooden marker. But over the years, with the harsh weather and the help of the termites, those disintegrated. So as you can see on the right-hand side, just as an example, there's nothing, just a post, a wooden post. So what we decided to do is to have a simple solution, a post from cement. It will never rust and it never be fallen apart, and a small aluminum plaque, which will never be destroyed or anything. It will be forever. It's a very simple, cheap solution. And every grave that's our project now will have a name, because most of the people have no families anymore in Suriname. And we hope that in the next 2-3 years, we will have all the cemeteries, every tombstone will have a name. So this is basically our presentation. I thank you so much for being patient and listening to my presentation. And this is just a picture to let you know of the Bracha v'Shalom, or blessing and peace, the old synagogue in the Jordan Savannah in the jungle. It was disappeared in the jungle, and only during World War II, when the Dutch brought prisoners of war from Indonesia, they made a camp in Suriname in the jungle, and they said to them, they were collaborators with the Nazis. It's called NSB's. It's a party in Holland that collaborated with the Nazis. So they brought them as a internal camp, and they said to them, now you dig the jungle and find the Jewish synagogue and the Jewish cemetery in order to work hard, and they found it, So that's how we have it now, and it's clear. There is a non-profit organization that take care of the place, and I'll just share with you a secret. We are now in the final list of World Heritage Sites of UNESCO. There were hundreds of sites over the world, and the committee came and looked, and we are now in the last 20 or 30 finalists, and hopefully we will be declared as a World Heritage Site. So again, thank you so much for listening. If you have any questions, I'll be more than glad to answer them.
Jacob, I just want to say how incredible the information that you shared is today. I went on the website that you made and have sent you an email requesting to be a Chai member. I really think it's an incredible project and a link of heritage for our Jewish people. What incredible work you have done. What an incredible sharing of information for all those generations. It's really quite an extraordinary place, extraordinary Jewish history there. I wonder if anyone has questions that would like to unmute and ask.
Jacob, it's Sandra. First of all, I'd like to thank you for everything you've done, because many years ago when you first started this project, my husband and myself were more than happy to become lifetime Chai members. Now I have a question for you. As for a rabbi, I know it's for the high holidays and other events. What do they do if someone in the meantime is getting married, or if there is a bar mitzvah? What do they do for a rabbi?
We didn't have a Jewish marriage until Rabbi Chaim Beliak came, the first rabbi that I managed to convince to come. He came for 3 months, the longest period. And the day he came, a couple came to him, elderly couple, which have children and grandchildren, and said to him, Rabbi, we want a Jewish wedding. And he said, what's the rush? He said, we are waiting for 50 years. We're married, but we didn't have a rabbi to marry us. And this sweet couple, within 2 weeks, had a wedding, and the wife of the Surinamese president at that time came to attend the ceremony, the first Jewish ceremony wedding for, I don't know, since 50 years.
Wow.
We don't have a rabbi, and that was an opportunity to have a wedding. Bar mitzvahs, we do without a rabbi. We just, thank God, we have a group of Torah readers that run the community, and they are really, really good. And they know exactly what to do. So if there is a bar mitzvah, we teach them, they teach them, and the ceremony is done, but without a rabbi. Hope it answers your question, Sandra.
It does. Thank you.
Jacob, you mentioned that the congregation is a liberal congregation, but that traditions of Orthodoxy have maintained out of custom. So I'm curious, if a clergy person went down that was female, would that be a welcome thing, or would that be uncomfortable?
I think the community is liberal-minded. They understand, and they're not. They stick to tradition. That's only what they know. You can switch tomorrow to Orthodox, but for example, for Reconstructionists, but if you've never been to a Reconstructionist synagogue, you don't know what to do. So you continue to do the old ways, and that's how our Rosh Hashanah service is longer than my conservative synagogue that I'm member, because it goes forever. And sometimes I'm coming and helping to read the Torah, because the 5 readers cannot even continue. They are so tired and whatnot. So yeah, and it's just tradition, but they will accept anyone and everyone. They're very open-minded. They are very, very friendly, warm people. I got an email yesterday. It was sent just before the Shabbat from 2 Israelis that they said to me, we were in the last 2 weeks in Suriname. We hardly have no visitors, to be honest with you, hardly any, because people don't know where Suriname is. And this couple came from Israel. I think he's originally American, she's Israeli. And they both were members of Bnei Akiva, Orthodox, modern Orthodox Jews. And they said to me, we spent the last 2 Friday nights in the synagogue, and it was the most empowering experience since we're traveling in South America, they say. And they are Orthodox. So, the idea was everybody will be welcome.
Yes.
So don't discriminate. And, if you want to come, you are welcome, and more than welcome. Now, to help to understand, we have a place, used to be 70, 60 years ago, the rabbi's house, because for years, the rabbi used to have a house in the ground of the synagogue. But it fell apart. And we also helped the community to renovate it. And today it's a beautiful 2-bedroom apartment, air-conditioned, with internet, with a kitchen, with anything and everything. And when a rabbi comes, he stays there. When the rabbi is not there, if guests want to stay there, as I said, they're maximizing the assets that they have. This is now revenue generating. It's like before Airbnb started, we started this as a kind of an Airbnb, cheaper than any hotel, and it's in the downtown. It's just walking distance to anywhere, and you have your own freedom. So anyway, that's kind of an example of we're welcoming everyone.
Beautiful. Let's see, the Levine house is unmuted. Hi, Hinda.
Hi, thank you for your presentation. Jacob, I wanted to ask you, how did you first become involved with Suriname?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Okay, thank you for the question. Honestly, I tell you now the true story. I was living in I speak Dutch. I call myself originally from Israel, but I have Dutch history. And I worked in Holland, and I was studying also my master's degree in Holland. And at that time, there was a civil war in Suriname. And all what I heard, nobody heard about the civil war. It wasn't like at that time, like Sandinista in Nicaragua and stuff like that, or communist. It was just the Maroons and the Hindustanis that ruled the country at that time. They didn't get along. The bodyguard of the president, who was a Maroon, said that we don't get enough from the wealth of the country, and he started a rebellion. nobody heard about this rebellion because it was no interest for anyone in the world. Only in Holland you heard about it. And when I was there,
When was it? When was that? When was the Civil War?
the Civil War, it was after the independence in the 80s.
Okay.
And I was just, listening every day to the news in Dutch and the jungle commando, and I thought it's a terrible place and forward. I worked for a mining company in Toronto at the time as a consultant, and they tried to, it was a new mine that they built, and they had some issues, financial issues, and they sent auditors, but the auditors spoke English. And the locals pretend that they don't speak English, so they spoke only Dutch, and the books are in Dutch. So they asked me, Jacob, you speak Dutch, could you go for 2 weeks to Suriname to see what's going on? And I said, okay, they're so good to me, I said I will go. But in my mind, I still had the memories from the Civil War, and I thought, it's a basket case, it's the worst place on earth. But I left. I came, and there was nothing. The most friendly people on earth. The ethnic groups are living together like brothers. It's the only community that I saw in the Caribbean that the blacks and the whites and the Hindustanis and the Javanese, they're all brothers. They call themselves Surinamese. They don't care what the color of the cat, as long as he catch the mice. So it is amazing. I mean, amazing community of harmony and friendship. And no tension, no nothing. Everybody get married with anyone. And just a side story that the Jews don't suffer any anti-Semitism in Suriname today. Never. They are well respected. They are not in politics, but there's no anti-Semitism whatsoever in Suriname. So I came to Suriname for 2 weeks and I solved the problems. So the company said to me, Jacob, would you mind to extend it? And now that I saw how gorgeous place it is, it's a gem. And I just had no idea that it's existed and it's so friendly. And I mean, the people have embraced me like brother, lost brother. So I said, yeah, why not? And I started to work there and it took almost 3 years. And in 3 years, you become part of the community. I became a member and it's like my second home today. They're all my friends. I'm coming there. I'm just like someone who left Suriname and came back. So I'm very close to the community. I'm very connected and I'm feeling like I'm a lost son, if I can, give myself a compliment. So that's basically, it came as an accident that I didn't want to go. And that just shows how not to have prejudgment, just go see and then make your judgment. And, the worst became the best. And I'm so glad I did it. And yeah, that's it. That's what it is.
And you're still living there now?
I live in Toronto now, but I go every year. Until COVID-19, I used to go every year for either the high holidays or for visit. My daughter, youngest daughter, we did the bat mitzvah trip to Suriname. She wanted to go to Suriname, so we did a bat mitzvah trip to there. So the family was there. We spent time in the jungle and everywhere, and as I said, it's like my second home today. So I don't live there, but I visit there very often. And hope to be there soon again.
Was that a real snake that big?
Yeah, it's anaconda. There's some anaconda. They can go from here to Detroit, I think, if you see that.
Oh my goodness.
I don't fake anything.
Shocking.
Anything you saw, it's picture of real one. The small frogs that you said, the colorful, they look like toys from, Toys R Us. They're poisonous frogs. They're so tiny, but so deadly. It's called dart frogs. And there are so many of them in different colors. It's just amazing, But, they don't live in the city and they we don't touch them, so you're good. But the first settlers had to leave with all this, to clear the jungle and to avoid the malaria. There was no medical health system or anything. It was a very tough life. But, it was better than living in poverty in the slums of Amsterdam.
I have one last question.
Sure.
When you talked about the first Jewish community was Sephardic and Orthodox, and they were not accepting of the Ashkenazi. So the Ashkenazi, then you later said, were liberal. So they weren't Orthodox Ashkenazi Jews at the time.
No. They also were Orthodox. They only in 1999, with the two communities merged, they merged from Orthodox to liberal. But the Ashkenazi Jews were also Orthodox. Over the years, not everybody was Orthodox, but that was the only shul in town, you know?
Okay.
So you had to go and live according to the order. What do you do at home? Nobody cares. But, you know, I look at descendants of Suriname who moved to other countries, like in Israel. They live, or in the Netherlands. Some of my friends are very, very Orthodox because their parents left and they still very Orthodox. Others today, it's more liberal and they're open to anything and everything. But they were Orthodox Jews. The Ashkenazi came, but because of the special privileges that the Dutch and before the British, they were not allowed to own land. That was the only reason they couldn't become plantation owners or to get the wealth of the Sephardi.
Thank you.
Thank you.
No problem.
So a final thank you to you so much, Jacob Steinberg. I hope that you're able to come visit us at Temple Anshe Shalom in the coming year. We would love to welcome you back in person. And maybe some of us will visit Suriname. I just have to prepare myself for the snakes and the poison frogs. But aside from that, maybe Luba and I could.
think about the cock of the rock, this beautiful bird that you saw, you know, the little bird, the cock of the rock, and toucans and monkeys. And it's just incredible. You know, it's untouched jungles. You know, it's like maybe Costa Rica 50 or 100 years ago when tourists didn't discover the place, and it completely untouched. You know, it's unbelievable, beautiful, and friendly people, and everybody's welcome.
I know it has been my husband, Rabbi Cohen, really enjoys leading trips to Jewish communities, and this one is definitely on his list.
Oh,
to go.
I can arrange it for them. Don't.
All right, we'll get him to connect with you and talk about that. Thank you so much for today. We have one more session left next Sunday, and we have Julia Kollick, our own social activist here in Hamilton, and her primary focus has been. She actually was one of the founding families with you, Jacob and Kahila. And today her real passion is to help the homeless in Hamilton. And there's a project going on called HATS, which is the Hamilton Alliance for Tiny Shelters. This idea of creating tiny shed-like homes with locks so that the homeless have a place to stay while they're in kind of transition and learning how to be a community, part of a community again. So it's a project that's in motion, and that our social action committee at Temple Anshe Shalom is very interested in that project and following and looking forward to helping with it as well. So we'll learn more about that next Sunday. And then we're going to take a break, and we're coming back in April, mid-April after Passover, with Next Generation Breakfast Club, which focuses on our young people, maybe not so young. They're the children's of our longtime members and the exciting things they're doing. And Misha Appel will again be our amazing host, and she's helping me gather speakers for that. Should be a really, really interesting session. So thank you so much for this lovely Sunday. Beautiful to gather with all of you and continue our learning and our time together. Thank you so much, Jacob.
Thank you so much for having me. Again, appreciate it.
Bye for now.
Bye-bye.
Bye,
Bye, Sandra.
That's very good.